What's up, football world? I am Bucky Brooks. This is the Bucky Brooks Show. And man, so much news popping in the NFL world today that I had to pop on and record a podcast because one of the greatest coaches, and we'll go back and this will be true when history firmly writes the script on, writes the book on Mike Tomlin. One of the greatest coaches in NFL history, Mike Tomlin, has stepped down from his position with the Pittsburgh Steelers after 19 seasons, a 193-114-2 record, 8 division titles, a Super Bowl championships, and no losing seasons on his resume. Mike Tomlin is out. Now, we don't quite know what the future holds for him at this point, but after almost 20 years in one spot, he has decided to move on from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And there are a lot of people in Pittsburgh that have kind of been pining for this move for the last few years because Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. 7 straight playoff losses. I think it's the longest streak in NFL history in terms of a playoff drought for a team that is in it. And they've lost a ton of those by double digits. So when you have in Pittsburgh, Titletown, a team with a franchise with 6 Super Bowl titles, a team that is known for winning and they have lofty expectations and standards for their team, this bout with mediocrity has led the voices to ask for change. Mike Tomlin seemingly grew tired of all of the calls for his job despite his success, and maybe he wants to explore other options after taking a brief sabbatical where he does TV or just goes and lays on the beach for a while before he recharges his battery and decides that he wants to jump back in the NFL cycle. Here's what I will say, and we'll celebrate him before we move on and talk about what could be next for the Steelers and for him. I will say this. Mike Tomlin was young when he took this job. Mike Tomlin was a relatively unknown commodity when he went from defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings to being the head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But wow, did he have a lot of success. And some of that success was due to his personality, his no-nonsense approach, his willingness to take no excuses for whatever the circumstances were. The Pittsburgh Steelers had to overcome those circumstances, and frequently they did. When he had a rock-solid defense loaded with stars, this defense played at a high level, and part of that was due to Dick LeBeau obviously being involved, who is also a Hall of Famer, them meeting halfway to be able to really build out a Steelers defense that continue to perform at a high level. You could just go back and look at their heyday. They were always 1 or 2, competing a lot of times with the Baltimore Ravens for the top defense in the league. Mike Tomlin played a big part in that, coming from a scheme where in Tampa first, where he learned Tampa 2 under Tony Dungy, took some of that, operated it in Minnesota, and then meshed the scheme with what Dick LeBeau, the zone blitz master, was doing in Pittsburgh for years and years and years, and they found a way to make it work. This team then transitioned to where they had Ben Roethlisberger, who had evolved from being a bit of a game manager when he won a Super Bowl with Bill Cowher to being the ultimate game changer when he won a Super Bowl for Mike Tomlin. He was able to adapt and adjust. They became a very explosive and exciting offensive team when Ben Roethlisberger was there. They were able to sustain that when you had the Bees, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger, and others playing around. The one thing that was always consistent, the Steelers were always a team that was in the tournament. They always were knocking on the door of being a title contender, even though they couldn't kick the door down after they won it and they didn't go again. They were always in the conversation, which is what every franchise wants. That said, there's a little bit of maybe disappointment, or some would say like some underachievement from this team because they couldn't get past the pesky New England Patriots repeatedly. It seemed like the Patriots always had their number, but then you look at other teams, they always had a way of having the Kansas City Chiefs and being able to deal with them, being able to deal with some of the other teams. And when you talk about the Patriots dynasty, you have to talk about those frequent battles that they had with the Pittsburgh Steelers somewhere along the way, where the Steelers just couldn't get past Tom Brady and company to be the team to represent the AFC. When I look at the Steelers under Mike Tomlin, there are a couple of things that I think about. I think about the continuation of an identity built on physicality and toughness. a team that no matter when you went to their spot where you played them, if the Steelers were on the schedule, you knew what kind of game it was. It was going to be a physical game on both ends. They were going to make you play on their terms, and they were unapologetic in terms of the way that they played. A lot of that was due to Mike Tomlin, his personality, his demeanor, the demands that he had on this team. Man, they played with an edge, and that edge resulted in a lot of wins in Pittsburgh. But now we're in an era where some would say that this has become an offensive game. You need an offensive-minded coach to be the leader of the team, because to have an offensive-minded coach, that means you have consistency with the offensive system when you have a quarterback. Mike Tomlin comes from the defensive side. Some would say Mike Tomlin is more of a rah-rah coach than an X and O's guy. I would beg to differ, given his background as a defensive coordinator, what he's done with defensive backs and those things. But that's the perception of him. And in Pittsburgh, since Ben Roethlisberger retired, I would say the biggest thing that has kept Mike Tomlin from succeeding has been the lack of quarterback play, whether it's Mason Rudolph, Mitch Trubisky, Russell Wilson, whoever they've tried to trot out there as a quarterback, even finishing up with Aaron Rodgers, has not been good enough to measure up with what the other teams in the AFC had when it came to superstar quarterbacks. This is an era when Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and others were dominating. Tom Brady was dominating for a big part of that. Oftentimes, Pittsburgh went to the gunfight with a butter knife at quarterback after the Ben Roethlisberger era. The other part that I would talk about when it comes to Mike Tomlin is, even though there's a feel of an underachieving team under his direction, I would contend, how many times did the Pittsburgh Steelers have the better team in the postseason? How many of those games did they lose in the postseason? Were they the better team from 1 to 53 when it came to player to player, quarterback to quarterback, and those things? I believe Mike Tomlin's greatness is actually illustrated in his ability to turn an average team into a good team, a team that I would say punched above his weight for a big part of the latter stages of his career. And in doing that and putting the team in the tournament, I think what you do is you have raised expectations for what the team should have achieved compared to what the roster actually is. Now we get an opportunity to see that. We get a chance to see the flawed roster. We get a chance to see a new voice, new leadership, see if they can take this roster that has flaws and warts in certain areas and see if they can get it to perform at a higher level. Maybe this is a situation that becomes a win-win for the Steelers and for Mike Tomlin, much like people like to point to with Andy Reid and the Philadelphia Eagles. He moves on to another location. He finds success after reflecting. He makes some changes to maybe his personality and approach and finds a higher level of success in the second destination than he did the first. For the Steelers, maybe they find a way to tweak the roster, tweak the approach and the philosophies, and they begin to attain a level of success that meets the standards of the fan base, much like the Philadelphia Eagles. It is interesting. It sounds easy, but it is more difficult to pull off when you're in a league that is super competitive. So now, what are the next steps? Let's talk about Mike Tomlin first in terms of the next steps for him. Josina Anderson, who is a colleague and a friend of mine, who has tweeted out there that there were rumblings throughout the season that Mike Tomlin was going to make it known that this was his last year. He was stepping away. She also put out there that Mike Tomlin reportedly has a preference from being in a warm weather environment if he takes another job. Well, when you look at the available listings, that would put you in two. One would be Miami, nice location, very warm. Another would be the Arizona Cardinals. Of those two, it would come down to, how does Mike Tomlin feel about the quarterback situations at both of those spots? Because both teams have quarterbacks that are on blockbuster deals. And I know we can talk about the general managers and is there a relationship with that work out? But I think before we get to that part of it, you have to look at quarterbacks, because as we said, in this league, it's about superstar quarterback play. And can you have a superstar quarterback that can elevate your team in the tournament? That has been the thing that has crippled Mike Tomlin. He certainly has to know that going into a new situation, I need a quarterback that can elevate and play at a level that would get me into the championship rounds with a chance to be able to win. If you're looking at Tua Tagovailoa and Kyler Murray, which one would you select? I would say that he probably would be influenced and impacted maybe by his relationship with Brian Flores and maybe the way that Brian Flores felt about Tua Tagovailoa. That could play a part in whether he would want to go to Miami or not, particularly if they have to hold on to Tua Tagovailoa with that hefty contract. In Arizona, there will be some questions and concerns about Kyler Murray. And I won't say the work ethic because I don't think that is fair, but I would say some of the commitment when it comes to playing at a championship level at that position. Can Mike Tomlin find a way to crack the code to get Kyler Murray to take his game up while rebuilding the rest of the team around him? Some would say when you look at that roster is average, okay, they could play better, and maybe they just need a new voice, a sterner voice, a more demanding voice than the one that they had under Jonathan Gannon. To me, I think Arizona would be very, very interesting for Mike Tomlin because he not only would change locations, but he would change conferences. And how would he fare in those battles in a very tough NFC West against the San Francisco 49ers, the Seattle Seahawks, and the LA Rams? That also can play into it. I know he knows the battles in the AFC North, but man, that NFC West is a head knocker. So he also would have to take that into consideration. Now, another option would be, how about I just sit out this cycle completely? Go to TV, let me talk about the game in a different way. Let me relax. Let me take a cushy salary, and let me see if I do have the love to go back and kind of jump back in the rat race that has consumed him for 19 years as head coach and even more as an assistant coach at various levels. We'll see. Very interesting. I don't think Tennessee would be in play in those things, but I think everyone would want to kick the tires. People will talk about the Giants. They threw out the Baltimore Ravens, which would almost be the ultimate Rick Pitino move, going from Kentucky to Louisville. I can't even imagine him going from the Steelers to being on the Ravens sideline, but who knows? Money makes people do crazy things, and the opportunity could be one that he couldn't turn down when it came to potentially coaching a Lamar Jackson and reestablishing the culture in that locker room. We'll see. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, now this opens up because it opens up a new can of worms because Pittsburgh Steelers have operated in a mom and pop fashion for a long time. The Pittsburgh Steelers have always looked for a defensive-minded coach. They've hired him young, and they've gotten out the way. If you look at Chuck Noll, you look at Bill Cowher, you look at Mike Tomlin, all former defensive coordinators that took over the program and had a lot of success in time. When I look now at some of the young defensive coordinators that would fit the bill, Jesse Minter absolutely would fit the bill. Young, dynamic, great defense with the Chargers, won a title at the collegiate level, a national title with Michigan, has the energy that everyone wants, does a great job with schemes. You can see what he would potentially do with that defense. To me, that seems like a natural fit if they stay with a profile that has been very successful for them. Some would say Chris Shula would also do that. Coming from the LA Rams, what he has done and what he has learned from Sean McVay, that certainly could be interesting. The legacy piece in terms of the Shula name and knowing what Don Shula did and having a descendant in that building could be intriguing. But you add my brother, I think Jesse Minter would be a perfect fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers if that was the case. If they go with an offensive mind, yeah, there are a couple candidates that would come to mind. People will talk about Clint Kubiak, and Clint Kubiak is going to have his fair share of jobs. He's going to have his pick of jobs, whether that's Baltimore, whether that's Atlanta, wherever he wants to go. Like, he's going to be able to kind of call his shot when it comes to that. So he is certainly interesting. But there is a young name that I'll throw out there that is really going to pick up steam, and that's Grant Udinski, offensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just turned 30, had a tremendous amount of success helping Trevor Lawrence turn around the game, helping the Jaguars turn around that game. If we're talking about young and hiring someone that can grow into the job and beyond, he could be someone that is very, very interesting. You hear Nate Schlierhaus from the Rams also throwing in, 35 years old, understands it from a quarterback, has done the Sean McVay thing. The Steelers will need a quarterback at some point. I don't know if this is the draft to get one. I don't know where they would get one off the street, but at some point, having an offensive guru who's very comfortable developing quarterbacks and building a system around him, that could be something that's very appealing to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Regardless of where they go and direction of this, this is going to be fascinating to watch how both parties find their way past this tough divorce. Mike Tomlin, where does he end up? How does he play this out? Does he become a TV star, or does he take his act on the road and see if he can enjoy success in his second location? For Steelers, who's the next one that can take on the job and hold it for the next 15 years? That is a fascinating watch, one that I am all about, and I can't wait to see it.